Odds are good that Adam Leipzig has been involved in at least one of your favorite movies, from March of the Penguins to Dead Poet Society to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Now he's bringing his filmmaking knowledge to you via MediaU, a new company he's founded and leads that's dedicated to teaching people filmmaking. You can learn more about MediaU by checking out some of their free videos right here at the Movie Maker YouTube channel, or you can visit MediaU.com. And if you want to try a MediaU class, I recommend starting with the Marketing and Distribution Roadmap for Independent Filmmakers. If you sign up now at MediaU.com and use discount code MovieMaker011123, you'll get $100 off. And now, here's Adam Leipzig, CEO and founder of MediaU, and you can also check out an extended version of this conversation at our podcast, Movie Maker. Just to begin, I was just watching your TED Talk, where you talk about going to your 25th reunion at Yale and finding that 80% of your classmates were unhappy, and finding that those who were happy tended to be those who learned for the sake of learning.
Class reunions are a pretty amazing sociological study because it's a consistent cohort. It's people who have all gone through the same formative years of 4 years of college or university. Largely, they came from the same cultural and socioeconomic background. And then to look at that slice of humanity 25 years on and say, okay, what's consistent, what's the same, what's different? The remarkable thing that I found is that the people who had gone into professions for the money or because their parents told them they had to, like, I really want to be a writer, but mom and dad said I had to be a doctor, a lawyer, I had to go to Wall Street, I had to go make a lot of money. At the 25-year mark, let's call that the half-life mark, they were really unhappy. And they were saying, well, gee, like I did this, and like, what do I do now? I feel like I have spent 25 years, but I haven't really gotten a return on the investment of time. On the other hand, those of us who studied literature, theater, language, things which do not have overt practical career focus, actually had great careers because we had been doing things that we loved. We were not in it for the money. Some of us had made money, others of us had not made a ton of money, but everybody was doing okay. They were paying the rent, they were putting their kids through school, they were putting food on the table, they were driving cars, but we were happy because we were doing things that we liked. And that's I thought that was just like such a moment of understanding, why do we do what we do? And how do we do things that are really meaningful? Because at the end of the day, when we're all gone, we don't take our money, we don't take our stuff, we take relationships. Relationships are the only thing that we really leave behind. And the good work that we've done to make the way easier for other people. That's really what we leave behind. And how do we amplify that?
Yeah. So how did you find your way to your career when you left Yale?
Well, interesting story because it's all about coincidence. The plan was to go into theater, and I had an apartment in New York, and I was going to go to New York, get an apartment, and conquer New York theater. And 3 days before I was supposed to go to New York, 3 days before graduation, the apartment fell through, and I had no place to live. So I got on a plane and went back home to Los Angeles. Best thing that ever could have happened to me, because after I came back to Los Angeles, I was living in my parents' house. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I know I wanted to be in theater. And at a certain point, I realized that no theater was going to call me. I had to go actually out and call them and make some house calls. And there had been a theater that I had attended called the Los Angeles Actors Theater, which was a fairly new theater at that time. And I really liked their work. They did interesting new plays. So I went over there and I said, do you got any openings? And Diane White, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, was the producer there. And she said, yeah, we need a stage manager. Have you ever stage managed? And I said, yes, lying that I'd stage managed. And instantly I was hired to become a stage manager of one of 9 one-act plays within a few months, I became the production stage manager of all 9 one-act plays. Within a few months, I'd become the dramaturg and was producing at the theater. And then we took this theater, which was in Hollywood, and leveraged the work that we had done and the work we continue to do to build the Los Angeles Theater Center, which is a 1,200-seat, 4-theater performing arts complex in downtown Los Angeles, which we opened. And if I'd been in New York, would I have been able to build and open a new theater? No. So it turned out, I mean, how many times in one's life in America do you actually get to build and open a new theater? It happens so rarely. So I was really fortunate to fall into that. And that's how that's what I did coming out of college. And then at a certain point, having done that for 7 years, I took a look at the audience and I realized, well, if we have a really successful play, it's going to run for 6 weeks and 3,000 people are going to see it. I want to work for a larger audience. I want to work on a bigger canvas. And that was the point at which I decided, let's go explore the movie universe. And I moved into movies.
So you weren't quite 30, I'm guessing?
I was 28.
Wow.
28.
We're in the 80s now? 90s?
We're in the 80s.
So how did you get into film?
I knew at that point, there had been very few people in the decades, immediately in that decade and previous decades, immediately previous decades, that had ever actually made the transition from theater into film. The people of the studios didn't, well, first, they never went to theater, even though they poached our actors all the time. They didn't go to theater. They didn't understand theater. They came out of other universes, unlike the people who founded the studios 100 years ago, who had come out of theater and vaudeville and live performance. But at that time in the 70s and 80s, that's not who was running the studios. So they didn't understand theater and look down on it, therefore I didn't really have any relationships in the movie universe. I knew one person who was an agent, and I went to him and I said, I'm kind of interested in movies, and he said, you've got to be kidding. You are never going to succeed. Just like, go do something else. Go back to school. But he gave me one more name. He said, I said, can I talk to one other person? He gave me one name of somebody else to talk to. I had the same conversation with that person who told me it would never work, but gave me one other person to talk to. And I developed a strategy for doing information interviews where I would just go in and meet people, knowing there was no job on the table, and not even saying I wanted the job, just saying, I kind of want to understand, like, what is this movie thing? What's the geography? Who does what? How does it work? And because I had intuited that if you're looking for a job, nobody wants to talk to you. But if you ask people about themselves and what they do, and then you shut up, they love talking about themselves. And I did this on a spreadsheet, and I did 87 information interviews in 90 days. Wow. Which was crazy. It was a full-time job because you'd schedule it and then people would cancel. You'd have to reschedule. And I had my car, which I think at the time was, I don't know, something like some totally used Toyota. And I was going back and forth between the Valley and the West Side, the Valley and the West Side, sometimes three or four times a day, right? Because you could never, ever get these meetings scheduled so they were geographically close, because God has a sense of humor and it just doesn't work that way. So I did 87 information interviews in 90 days. The 88th was Disney, and they were hiring. And at that point, Disney was a newly remade studio. They had not had a hit in a decade. They had not released an animated film in a decade. Jeffrey Katzenberg and Michael Eisner had just been brought over from Paramount to try to breathe life into the studio, which had not made a movie that made more than $100 million ever. So there were, and then I was hired. And it was good that it was the 88th interview, because if it had been the first one, I would not have known what to say. But having understood the geography and the nomenclature and the acronyms and the kind of questions people ask you, I was prepared to go in and suddenly be asked all these questions. There were 8 people in the creative group of the studio: Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg at the top, me at the bottom, 5 people in between. And over the next years, these were the years of Lion King and Little Mermaid and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and Dead Poet Society, which were 2 of my early movies. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which was the first live-action Disney movie in the longest time. We really reinvented the Disney live-action brand with that movie.
Wow.
And it was very productive. Jeffrey Katzenberg never said he was my mentor, but he was my mentor. He taught me so much about work and work ethic and how do you work with creative people. How do you address the perpetual successive approximation of getting movies better and better and better over many iterations before you finally release them? And it was a great experience.
What is your title? I imagine you have many titles during this time, but what is your actual end job title?
Well, I started as creative executive and I ended up as senior vice president of production.
Mm-hmm. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I mean, I love that movie so much. I remember seeing that at the South Bay 6 drive-in when I was a kid.
Thank you. Thank you. That was one of my very, very first films, and it started something that I've repeated, which is working on a film for a first-time director. At that time, this was Joe Johnston's first film. Joe had been the lead visual effects supervisor at ILM. This was his first chance to direct, and I've had the pleasure and the privilege of either supervising or producing the first films of a number of directors since then, including the film that I just finished producing in Sicily for a first-time director. It's something that I really that I love to do, and I feel really privileged to be able to do to provide the ecosystem for first-time directors to have a good experience.
Were there any others that really stand out?
Other movies?
First-time directors or films? I mean, there's so you have.
I mean, the first-time directors. John Turteltaub, whose first film was Three Ninjas, which nobody saw unless you were a 12-year-old boy, in which case you saw it about 20 times that year that it was released. That ended up being the most profitable film of that year. Luc Jacquet, who directed March of the Penguins, which was also the most profitable film of that year. That's a film that I did when I was at National Geographic. Shireen Dabbas's first film, America.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just incredible.
Yeah.
And how many films have you produced? Is it, I said 30 or 40. Am I close? Am I short?
I'm now up to 36. Oh. Not all of them do I have the producer title. Some of them I supervised or distributed, but there have been 36 films altogether that I've been hands-on involved in.
Incredible. And can you talk about going over to National Geographic and what that job entailed?
Yeah, at that time, National Geographic Society, which is a gigantic nonprofit and was founded to do good in the world, wanted to be in the movie business. They weren't really in the movie business, and but they had an ambition for it. So they asked me to design a strategy for how they could do that. I spent 6 months devising the plan and building out the strategy for them. And then when I shared that with them, they looked around and said, well, will you run the company, please? I said, you bet, I would love to. And I had a great 7-year run there. The first film that we came out of the box with was a film called The Story of the Weeping Camel, which was also a first film directed by Biamba Surendava and Luigi Filorni, which won the DGA award for Best Documentary Feature and a bunch of other awards. Really beautiful film. March of the Penguins was one of the films that we did during that tenure. A documentary called God Grew Tired of Us, which I truly love, a really beautiful documentary. The Way Back, which is Peter Weir's film. There's another film called The Way Back, but this is Peter Weir's The Way Back, I've been really fortunate to work with a very early film and a recent film from Peter Weir. Dead Poet Society, of course, was directed by Peter Weir, and then The Way Back was directed by the great Peter Weir. Yeah, and we had a great run at Nat Geo.
We're getting out of order, but I'd be super remiss to not ask you have any Robin Williams interactions or any Robin Williams stories, what it was like making Dead Poet Society, which is, it feels like a very you movie with the idea of seizing the day and the idea of really embracing knowledge for the sake of knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, so Robin, there's several movies I did that Robin was in. Good Morning Vietnam is a film that I worked on, which was really the film that broke him into stardom. Dead Poet Society followed that. Later, I was working with Interscope, the company that produced Jumanji. So the first Jumanji had Robin in it, and also What Dreams May Come. So there's a certain amount of, Robin was either directly or sort of as part of the orbit of a number of films that I've done. And when I heard that he had passed, I was in New York at a restaurant, and I just got a text, and I just fell to the floor. I was devastated. But the thing about Robin is that he was exactly like that. Like what you saw, he was that person. He was that fast, that quick, that smart, that funny, that loving, that generous. He was not an actor. Some actors, there's a persona on the screen that is wholly different from what they're like in the off-screen, so-called real-life world. Robin was exactly the same person, and he was hilarious and generous and loving. Never had an unkind word to say to anybody or about anybody.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, back to Nat Geo and
okay,
into what you're doing now. Does Nat Geo lead directly to MediaU?
It leads with one bridge. And the bridge is that after I left National Geographic, the publishing company Macmillan reached out to me and asked if I would write the standard textbook on filmmaking. And I said, okay, well, can I look at the one that people are using now? They said there hasn't been one written in 20 years. I said, you've got to be kidding me. What are professors using? They said, well, they're Xeroxing articles from trade magazines, we think. So I agreed to become the lead author on that book. It's called Filmmaking and Action. It's out there. It's being used. I'm extremely proud of it. I think it is. It starts with, I have an idea to make a movie, and then it goes all the way through distribution and release, every part of the process. And I worked with a couple of other writers. I was the lead writer and really organized the supervision of the entire project. And I got the cooperation of the Academy, the Directors Guild, the Association of the Society of Cinematographers, the Editors Guild, Screen Actors Guild, Producers Guild. Every guild and organization offered up their expertise and their experts, so we could really do a great and definitive job of encapsulating 100 years of movie making knowledge, smarts, technique, and put it into something that is codified. I also shot about 20 videos that go along with the books of people doing what they do and talking about how they do it. And it was a great experience. It took forever. It was my first real interaction with the academic universe. Because when you write a textbook, it then goes out for academic review to various universities that might adopt it. And if you think studio notes are bad, wait till you get professor notes. Professor notes are so specific and so demanding. And so we did 3 rounds of professor notes. At a certain point, I called my publisher and said, Erica, Clint Eastwood has made and released 5 movies in the amount of time it's taken us to get this book out. And it's just like ink on pulped trees. Why does it take so long? She said, Adam, it's the process. So that was the process. And while I was writing that book, I took a 3-semester engagement at Chapman a film school here in Southern California because I really wanted to learn how students want to learn, because students are awesome at teaching you how they want to be taught. There are two big takeaways from that. One is they do not want to be lectured to. People want to do things and actually have the experiences. And that turned into the experiential parts of the book, and also turned into the completely experiential approach to training and mentoring at MediaU, the company that I'm running now. I also was able to really look at what film schools that charge a lot of money do and don't do. And Chapman is a really good school. USC is a good school. AFI is good. NYU Tisch is good. There are other good schools. But if you look at the universe of film schools, of which there are about 40 in the United States that have some quality and repute, and you look at the outcomes after that, 5 years after graduation, on average, less than 10% of the graduates have a job anywhere near the industry. And in some cases, less than 5% of the graduates have a job anywhere near the industry. What they do have is a job driving Uber or working at Starbucks to pay off a lot of student loans.
Yeah.
And I look at that and said, wow, that's failure. It's failure. It's crushing failure for the desire, the creative desire that people who went to those schools had when they first applied, when they first wanted to go to those schools. It's crushing failure for our industry because we're not really getting benefit of that talent. And by the way, film schools have about a 3% acceptance rate. So there's 97% of the people who didn't even go. And then when they couldn't get in, thought, well, there's never going to be a job in the media industries for me. So how do we solve that crushing problem? And also, how do we broaden out the potential for people to have access to training and mentoring that's really practical, that really gets people on a pathway to jobs and careers? Because I believe that if you have talent and if you are persistent, I think persistence is probably one of the biggest attributes of successful people, you should be able to pay the rent as a creative person. Now, you may not be doing it with the thing that you say you want to do. Like it may not, you may say, I want to be a director, but you can't direct movies all the time because that's just a really hard gig. But maybe you have specific skill but you discover along the way, you're kind of an awesome production manager. Well, as a production manager, you can kind of work 52 weeks a year if you want to, if you're good. So how do we show people that there are 150 different professions in the media universe, and how do we create accelerated training and mentoring for them in months instead of years, and for a few $1,000s instead of hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is what large education institutions charge for 2 to 4 year programs. And that was the idea behind creating MediaU.
Yeah. You don't necessarily get the cachet that comes with, I went to AFI or I went to USC. There's people who will tell me they went to AFI and I just know right away, this person knows what they're doing. I'm going to listen to their pitch for an article for Movie Maker.
Right.
How do you get that cachet associated with MediaU so that people know this person knows what they're talking about? They've been through this course.
Yeah. And again, I want to make really clear, I'm not saying anything against AFI or USC or NYU Tisch or Chapman. Like those are great institutions. They produce great graduates. They produce a trickle of graduates, not a ton of people, but that's what they do. Two answers to your question. First, we will get that cachet because we have to build that cachet as people go through our programs and graduate and get jobs. And then people hear where they got their training and mentoring, and they discover, oh, MediaU. As MediaU grows and we get wider reach and wider adoption, that will just come more and more. But the other thing is that every time I've hired people for production, I've actually never asked where they went to college. I actually don't know where the people on my movies went to college. I've looked at their reel or their portfolio. I've looked at their references. I talked to the people that they just worked with to make sure that they're good collaborators. What we really care about is, do you know how to do it? Will you be a good member of the team? And will you be the right creative fit for this project? And if you went to college, university, that's great, but that's not what's going to get you the gig.
Just watching your TED Talk, just talking to you now,
Yeah.
I can see why you're a good educator. I mean, I can see why people like talking to you. You're not sort of driving home points or anything like that. It's not, it doesn't feel like I'm watching a PowerPoint. You're just like, you have a very easy manner.
I hate PowerPoint, but go ahead.
Did that come naturally, or is that something that you evolved through teaching?
I think it's something that I evolved through producing.
Hmm.
And as you may know, I teach at the business school at UC Berkeley. So I continue to teach, and I enjoy educating. But I think educating is not, it's not lecturing. And I think good education is exactly the same thing as good producing. For me, good producing is, well, I'll use a biology analogy. It's about creating culture. If you were in biology, you had an agar plate and you put some drops of something on it and put it in the oven, and 3 days later, stuff had grown because you'd cultured some kind of a bacteria or whatever it was. I think that producing and educating is creating a culture. Culture is creating the nutritive medium where people can grow and do their best work. As a producer, it's about making sure that there's the right resources, the right amount of time, the right amount of money, the right people to collaborate well. And then you kind of stand back and let that happen, and give some comments and some guiding. And maybe you've done it a bunch of times before, so you have some pattern recognition, and you say, oh, don't go down that road. It's a dead end. How about we go this way? And you can save people some time. And maybe you have a vast personal library of cinema, so you can say, well, when Truffaut encountered this problem, here's how we solved it, and so you can talk about those things. But that's really what you do, is you just create this ecosystem where people can thrive and discover. And in the education universe, learning doesn't happen because someone talks to you. Learning happens because you do stuff and you fail, and you say, oh, that didn't work, let's do something else. And you fail fast and you fail often, and then you get better and better and better. And so for me, that's exactly the same process. And it's about trusting your instincts and discovering your instincts. When you are early in your career, in any career, especially in the creative fields, your instincts are all you have. And when you're early, your instincts are not as good as they will be 10 years later. And there's nothing you can do about that except keep doing it, so your instincts keep getting better and better and better.